In the spring of 1943, British intelligence faced an impossible problem. The Allies were planning to invade Sicily, the stepping stone to mainland Europe, but there was no way to surprise the Germans. Sicily was the obvious target. Anyone looking at a map could see it. The island sat like a football at the toe of Italy's boot, perfectly positioned for an amphibious assault. German intelligence knew it. Hitler knew it. The entire Nazi high command was waiting for the invasion they knew would come. And in war, when the enemy knows exactly where you are coming, soldiers die. Not in ones or twos, but in thousands. The beaches would run red with Allied blood. The invasion could fail before it even began, setting back the liberation of Europe by years. The strategic situation was dire. After years of fighting, the Allies finally had the resources and momentum to take the fight to Hitler's fortress Europe, but the geography of the Mediterranean left them with limited options. Sicily was the obvious choice, which made it the most dangerous choice. Thousands of Allied soldiers would die on those beaches unless something changed the equation. What the Allies needed was a miracle, or at least a way to make the Germans believe the invasion was coming somewhere else. What they got was one of the most audacious deception operations in military history, a plan so bizarre, so macabre, so utterly implausible that it should never have worked. Yet it did. And it involved a corpse, fake documents, a fictional love affair, and a level of creativity that would fool the Nazi war machine at the highest levels. The plan was born in the minds of British intelligence officers who understood that sometimes the best lies are wrapped in truth. They called it Operation Mincemeat, and it was brilliant in its macabre simplicity. They would obtain a dead body, dress it as a Royal Marines officer, plant false invasion plans on the corpse, and let it wash up on the coast of Spain, where German spies operated freely under the cover of Spanish neutrality. The Germans would find the body, discover the documents, and believe that the real Allied invasion target was not Sicily but Greece and Sardinia. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble that relied on the Germans finding the body, believing the documents were genuine, and acting on the false intelligence. But in the spring of 1943, with the fate of the invasion hanging in the balance and thousands of lives at stake, desperate gamblers were exactly what Britain needed. The idea itself was not entirely new. During World War I, British intelligence had floated similar concepts, and in 1942, there had been a smaller operation called Operation Torch where a body with false documents had been used in North Africa. But Operation Mincemeat would be different in scale and sophistication. This would not be a simple planted document. This would be the creation of an entire human being, complete with a life story, personality, relationships, and a past that would withstand the intense scrutiny of German intelligence analysts who were among the best in the world. The Abwehr, German military intelligence, was not staffed by fools. They would examine every detail, question every inconsistency, and look for any sign that this was a British trick. The deception would have to be perfect, or it would be worse than useless. A detected deception would confirm to the Germans that Sicily was indeed the target. Finding a suitable corpse proved more difficult than expected. They needed someone who had died recently, whose body would be consistent with drowning at sea and would not decompose too quickly in the water. They needed someone with no close family who might ask uncomfortable questions or demand to see the body. They needed someone whose death could be kept absolutely secret, whose disappearance would not be noticed or investigated. These requirements were extraordinarily specific, and for weeks, the operation seemed to stall as they searched London's morgues and hospitals for the right candidate. Medical experts were consulted. Coroners were discreetly approached. The clock was ticking, and the invasion was being planned while they still lacked their most crucial component, a dead body. Finally, in a London morgue, they found him. His name was Giowende Michael, a 34-year-old Welsh man who had died from ingesting rat poison, though whether by accident or suicide was never entirely clear. He was homeless, destitute, and utterly alone in the world. He had no family, no friends who would miss him, no one who would ask questions about what happened to his body. He had died on January 28, 1943, and his body had been preserved in a morgue, waiting for burial in a pauper's grave. In life, Giowende Michael had been invisible, forgotten by society, one of thousands who fell through the cracks of the British social system. In death, this forgotten man would become Major William Martin of the Royal Marines, and he would play a role that could change the course of the war and save thousands of lives. There was one significant problem: the cause of death. Rat poison does not produce the same physical signs as drowning. However, the medical experts assured the intelligence officers that the body had been cold enough, long enough, that a Spanish pathologist would likely not detect anything unusual, especially if the examination was cursory. It was a risk, another gamble in a plan built on gambles, but they had no other options. Time was running out. The British intelligence officers, led by Lieutenant Commander Ewan Montague of Naval Intelligence and Flight Lieutenant Charles Chumley of MI5, set about creating a complete identity for their fictional officer. Montague was a brilliant lawyer in civilian life, methodical and detail-oriented, exactly the kind of mind needed for this operation. Chumley was creative and imaginative, able to think of the small human details that would make the deception convincing. Together, they made a formidable team. This was not just about forging documents or creating false papers. They were creating a human being, complete with a past, a personality, quirks, habits, relationships, and a life that never existed but had to seem absolutely real to the most suspicious minds in German intelligence. Major Martin received a complete identity that was built layer upon layer with obsessive attention to detail. They gave him a birth date, a hometown, a service record that checked out when cross-referenced with actual Royal Marines records. They gave him a rank that was senior enough to be carrying important documents, but not so senior that his death would have been widely reported in military circles. They chose the name William Martin specifically because it was common enough that there were several real officers with that name, making verification difficult for German intelligence. Every choice was deliberate, calculated to withstand scrutiny. But the real genius was in the personal effects. Major Martin received a wallet filled with items that told a story. Ticket stubs from a London theatre showing he had seen a play just days before his supposed death, a stern letter from his bank manager at Lloyd's about an overdraft of £79 and 19 shillings, receipts for an engagement ring from a jeweller in London, a bill from his tailor for a new uniform, a letter from his father addressing him as, "My dear William," and discussing family matters in the mundane way that real families do. There was a photograph of his fiancée, actually a clerk from MI5 who had volunteered to pose for the picture, looking demure and proper in the style of the 1940s. They even included used keys, because a man carries keys. They included a pencil stub, because pens run out and everyone carries a backup. They included 2 theater ticket stubs for the same show, because of course he had taken his fiancée. Every single item was chosen to create a picture of a real human life. But the documents themselves were the real heart of the deception, the payload that all this elaborate theater was designed to deliver. Attached to Major Martin's briefcase with a chain was a letter from Lieutenant General Archibald Nye, Vice Chief of the Imperial General Staff, to General Harold Alexander, Commander of Allied Ground Forces in North Africa. The letter was written on official stationery, properly formatted, and bore Nye's actual signature, which had been carefully forged by an expert. The letter discussed in detail the upcoming Allied invasions, but it placed them in Greece and Sardinia, not Sicily. It mentioned Sicily only in passing, as a cover story designed to distract German attention, a double bluff that would seem brilliantly subtle to German analysts. The letter was a masterpiece of intelligence tradecraft, containing just enough real information to seem authentic, mixed with false intelligence that would send the Germans in the wrong direction. Another letter, from Lord Louis Mountbatten to Admiral of the Fleet Sir Andrew Cunningham, discussed equipment and logistics for the invasion forces. It made reference to a request for sardine supplies, a subtle wordplay on Sardinia that German intelligence analysts would be sure to catch and would likely interpret as a clever bit of British humor that confirmed the target. The British knew that German intelligence would analyze every word, every phrase, looking for hidden meanings and confirmations, so they planted clues that would seem to validate the false narrative. They even included a letter of introduction for Major Martin, explaining that he was being sent to North Africa as a specialist in amphibious operations, which explained why he would be carrying such sensitive documents. The cover story had to explain everything, had to answer every question a suspicious mind might ask. The documents also included technical specifications for landing craft, details about beach conditions, and other military intelligence that was either real but outdated or false but plausible. The British were careful to include information that the Germans could verify through other sources, because nothing builds trust like partially confirmed intelligence. The Germans would check what they could, find that some of it was accurate, and therefore trust the parts they could not verify. It was psychological manipulation at its finest, playing on the natural human tendency to believe a source that has been right before. On April 19, 1943, the body of Gyelwenda W.R. Michael, now transformed into Major William Martin, was placed in a specially designed canister filled with dry ice to preserve it during the journey. The canister was loaded aboard the submarine HMS Seraph, which had been chosen for this mission because of its crew's experience with special operations and their ability to keep secrets. The submarine set sail from Holy Loch in Scotland, carrying its unusual cargo toward the coast of Spain. For 11 days, the submarine traveled underwater through hostile waters, avoiding German U-boats and air patrols. The crew knew they were carrying something important in that canister, but most of them did not know exactly what. The fewer people who knew the truth, the better. Secrecy was paramount. If word leaked, if the Germans learned what was coming, the entire operation would fail and might even alert them that Sicily was the real target. On April 30th, 1943, just before dawn, HMS Seraph surfaced off the coast of Huelva, Spain, in the pre-dawn darkness. The location had been carefully chosen. Huelva was known to have German agents operating in the area. The tides and currents would carry the body to shore. The local Spanish authorities were sympathetic to Germany and could be counted on to share whatever they found with the Germans. Everything had been calculated, planned, rehearsed in their minds 100 times. But now, in the actual moment, the weight of what they were doing settled on the crew like a heavy fog. The officers who had created this elaborate fiction stood on the submarine's deck for a moment in the cold Atlantic air, looking at the body dressed in its Royal Marines uniform, the briefcase chained to its wrist. Lieutenant Commander Montague was there, along with the submarine's captain and a few crew members who had been cleared to know the truth. They had spent weeks creating this man's identity, crafting his story, making him real in documents and photographs and letters. They had invented his love affair, his debts, his theater tickets, his entire existence. Now they were about to commit him to the sea, to trust that the currents would carry him to shore, that Spanish fishermen would find him, that the documents would reach German hands, that the Nazis would believe the lie. There were so many things that could go wrong. The body might sink instead of floating. It might wash up in the wrong place, far from German agents. The documents might be too damaged by seawater to read. The Germans might see through the deception immediately. The Spanish might simply give the body a proper burial without examining the briefcase. Any of 100 small failures could doom the entire operation. Lieutenant Commander Montague read Psalm 39 over the body in a brief ceremony that honored the man J.W.R. Michael had been, even if no one present knew his real name. I will take heed to my ways, that I offend not in my tongue. I will keep my mouth with a bridle, while the wicked is before me. The choice of psalm was deliberate, speaking to the nature of their deception and the secrets they carried. Then they activated the life jacket to ensure the body would float, checked one last time that all the documents were in place, and carefully lowered Major William Martin into the cold Atlantic waters. They watched as the currents began to carry him toward Spain, his body rising and falling with the swells, gradually disappearing into the darkness and morning mist. The submarine slipped beneath the waves and disappeared, leaving behind only ripples in the dark water. The die was cast. The plan was in motion. Now all they could do was wait and hope that their dead messenger would deliver his false message. They could not follow him. They could not control what happened next. They had done everything they could, and now it was up to fate, chance, and the gullibility of German intelligence. The body was discovered later that same morning by a Spanish fisherman named José Antonio Rey Maria, who spotted what appeared to be a drowned man floating in the water near Punta Umbria, just north of Huelva. Rey Maria pulled the body into his boat and notified the local authorities, who immediately recognized from the uniform that this was a British military officer. The Spanish naval authorities in Huelva took possession of the body and, as expected, conducted a preliminary examination. The briefcase chained to the wrist was noted, and the contents were carefully examined. Within hours, as the British had anticipated and hoped, the information had been passed to German intelligence agents operating in the area. Spain was officially neutral, but everyone knew where Spanish sympathies lay, especially after Germany had supported Franco during the Spanish Civil War. The British vice-consul in Huelva, Francis Haselden, was notified of the discovery and arrived to formally identify and claim the body of the British officer. Haselden played his role perfectly, showing appropriate concern and urgency, insisting that the body and all effects be returned to British custody immediately. But the Spanish authorities were slow, bureaucratic, apologetic, but firm in following their procedures. The body would have to be examined by a local pathologist. The paperwork would take time. Haselden protested, as he was supposed to, but not too much. The delay was actually what the British wanted, time for the Germans to photograph the documents. The entire interaction was a carefully choreographed dance where both sides knew the steps but pretended they did not. By the time the British officially received the body and the briefcase back, the Germans had photographed every single page of every document. The Spanish had tried to be discreet, carefully opening the sealed envelopes with steam and resealing them, but they left traces. When the documents finally reached London, British experts examined them under ultraviolet light and confirmed from the water stains, fiber disturbances, and slight imperfections in the resealing that the documents had indeed been opened, read, and photographed. The bait had been taken. The first part of the operation was complete. But the crucial question remained: would the Germans believe it? Or would they recognize it as the elaborate deception it was? In Berlin, German intelligence analyzed the documents with intense scrutiny. Were they genuine? Could this be a British deception? The Abwehr, German military intelligence, debated for days. Some officers were suspicious. The circumstances seemed almost too convenient. But the documents contained information that checked out. The names were real. The signatures appeared genuine. The personal effects on the body seemed authentic. And most importantly, the intelligence confirmed what the Germans already suspected, that the Allies might feint at Sicily while their real target lay elsewhere. Hitler himself studied the reports. He was convinced. He ordered massive reinforcements sent to Greece and Sardinia. Entire German divisions that could have defended Sicily were repositioned based on information found on a dead man's body. On July 10, 1943, Allied forces invaded Sicily. They met lighter resistance than expected because German forces had been dispersed across the Mediterranean based on the false intelligence from Operation Mincemeat. Thousands of Allied soldiers who would have died on those beaches survived because of a homeless man from Wales who became a fictional Royal Marines officer, because of love letters written by intelligence officers to a woman who never existed, because of a corpse that told a lie so convincing that it changed the course of the war. The true story of Operation Mincemeat remained classified for years after the war. When it was finally revealed, the world marveled at the audacity and brilliance of the plan. Glynwr Michael, the homeless man whose body became Major William Martin, received a proper military funeral in Spain, where he remains buried under his fictional name. His grave is tended by the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, a memorial to a man who never served in the military but who, in death, served his country more effectively than most soldiers ever could. The inscription on his grave identifies him as Major William Martin, Royal Marines, and in a sense, that is who he became. The man who never was became the man who changed history. And Pam, the fiancée who never existed, became one of the most important fictional characters of World War II, her love letters helping to win a war she never knew was being fought.